President.
Senator from Vermont.
Mr. President, first I'd ask unanimous consent that William Conlon, an intern in my personal office, be granted floor privileges throughout today.
The objection.
Mr. President, I listened with interest to the tremendous statement made by the Senator from California, Senator Feinstein. And as she has said on other occasions, she has spoken of this, and we Americans should listen. More than a decade ago, the Central Intelligence Agency began detaining and torturing human beings in the name of the war on terrorism. And then employees and contractors of the United States government were paid for by our taxpayers' dollars, abused, degraded, dehumanized people. They stripped them of their basic humanity, and then but more than stripping them of their basic humanity, they stripped America of its standing in the world as a leader in promoting and protecting human rights. Instead of protecting us as Americans, by their actions, they hurt all Americans. President Obama banned torture and cruel treatment when he took office, but only now, because of the courage and conviction of Senator Feinstein and the other members of the Intelligence Committee and their staffs, do we have the full public accounting of the CIA's action, the accounting that the American people deserve. Then the decision to release this historic report, as Senator Feinstein has courageously said, has been difficult. But it was the right and moral thing to do. If something is right and something is moral, no matter how difficult it is, you should do it. And releasing the report demonstrates that America, the America I love, is different. As Americans, we cannot sweep our mistakes under the rug and pretend they didn't happen. We have to acknowledge our mistakes. We have to learn from our mistakes. And in this case, we as Americans must and will do everything we can to ensure that our government never tortures again. 5 years ago, in 2009, I called for a commission of inquiry to review the then administration's detention and interrogation program and other sweeping claims of abuse of executive power in the Bush administration. I believe that in order to restore America's moral leadership, we have to acknowledge what happens in our name, because much of the leadership that we can show around the world is not based on our wealth or on the power of our military, but on moral leadership. And our nation needed, back then, they needed a full accounting of the CIA's treatment of detainees. We need it today, and with this report, at long last, we have it. Now, this is not the first report to condemn the detention and interrogation policies and practices that were used during the last administration, but it's the first to fully chronicle the actions of the most secretive of our government agencies, the Central Intelligence Agency. And the final report lays bare the dark truth about their program. And that truth is far worse, it's far more brutal than most Americans ever imagined. Now, we've all seen the shocking pictures from Abu Ghraib. We've read the cold clinical descriptions of harsh or enhanced techniques written by Department of Justice attorneys to justify such treatment. And we know that what was done at Abu Ghraib, while it terribly diminished the image of the United States throughout the world, it didn't in any one iota make us safer. In fact, many would argue it made us less safe. And the report makes clear one fundamental truth. The CIA tortured people. That's the bottom line. And no euphemistic description or legal obfuscation or pedophagy can hide that fact any longer. The Intelligence Committee report shows that techniques like waterboarding and sleep deprivation were used in ways far more frequent and cruel and physically harmful than previously known. And it shows that gross mismanagement of those in charge of the CIA, a shocking indifference to human dignity, led to horrendous treatment and conditions of confinement that went far beyond even what they had been approving. Turned out that senior CIA leadership did not even know that enhanced techniques were being used at one CIA detention facility. In fact, in one instance, one of their prisoners died as a result, left shackled on a concrete floor in a dungeon room, died of hypothermia. This is America. This is what we stand for. This is the image we want to give the rest of the world. This American doesn't think so. This American doesn't think so. It's not what brought my grandparents and great-grandparents to this country. And these so-called enhanced interrogation techniques were not just used on the worst of the worst either. In some instances, the CIA didn't even know who it was they were holding. CIA records show that at least 26 of the people detained by the CIA didn't meet the CIA's own standard for detention. And some of these individuals were subjected to this wonderful slogan, enhanced techniques, evil slogan. They were determined not even to be members of al-Qaeda. Moreover, the CIA relied on contractors, not even CIA personnel, but contractors who had no experience as interrogators to develop this program. They were happy to take American taxpayers' money. They didn't know what they were doing, but said, give us the money. And eventually, the CIA outsourced all aspects of the program to the company these contractors set up. Did they make a few $1,000s? No, they made $80 million to do this. This is a program out of control. It's yet another reason why Congress has to exercise its oversight responsibility. The report also disproves CIA claims that torture programs were necessary to protect our nation and its thwarted attacks. How many times have we heard that on this floor? Oh, but we need this to protect us. We need this to protect us from another 9/11. We had all the evidence we needed to stop 9/11. We hadn't even bothered to translate some of the material that our intelligence people had. After the fact, they decided we should really translate some of that material we have. And then we found what could have been stopped. This program of torture didn't make us safer. And as laid out in meticulous detail in the report, the use of these techniques do not generate uniquely valuable intelligence. In fact, the report thoroughly repudiates each of the most commonly cited examples of plots thwarted and terrorists captured. And that shouldn't come as a surprise. The Senate Judiciary Committee held numerous hearings on the Bush administration's interrogation policies and practices. What we heard time and again from witness after witness is that torture and other cruel treatments don't work. But there are still some who continue to argue, even in the face of overwhelming testimony, and actually now hard evidence to the contrary, the program thwarted attacks and saved lives. They defend the CIA's action. They argue the report does not tell the full story. These are the same people who participate in the rampant misrepresentations detailed in this report. The report shows that CIA officials consistently misled virtually everyone outside the agency about what was actually going on and about the results of CIA interrogations. It's very similar to what we had leading up to the war in Iraq after 9/11. I remember being in those hearings, Mr. President. I remember listening to the then Vice President. I remember listening to others in these secret hearings and thinking, it doesn't ring true. And I stated that I thought some of the things they were telling us didn't ring true. And I remember walking early one morning with my wife near our home, and two joggers coming up, calling us by name, people we'd never seen in the neighborhood. One of them said, I hear you have some questions. Have you asked to see report and names of particular report? I said, I hadn't. I didn't know there was such a thing. He said, you might find it interesting to read. I did. And then I raised even more questions about what I had read there, totally contradicted what the Vice President and others were saying. And I mentioned that to some. A few days later, we're out walking again, both joggers. My wife remembers this so well. They said, I see you read report such and such. I said, I did. But did they tell you about this other report? I said, I didn't know there was such one. You may find it interesting. And I got it. And it was obvious from that they were withholding evidence that Saddam Hussein had nothing to do with 9/11, contrary to what the Vice President and others were saying. There were no weapons of mass destruction, that this did not prove to be a harmful nation to us. In fact, they were actually well penned in by the no-fly zone we had set up. But we rushed to war because we'll show them they did 9/11, even though they had nothing to do with 9/11. Now, almost $3 trillion later, look at the mess we're in. The amount of material that was held back from people who should have seen it, including members of Congress, White House officials, even Justice Department lawyers were being asked to review the legality of CIA techniques. Now, in the coming weeks, when we go into the new Congress, we're going to hear a lot about the need for oversight. I would hope they would look at the report that Senator Feinstein and her committee have come out with, because this is where oversight should be at the top of the list. So, too, should the unprecedented spying by the CIA on the congressional staff investigating this program. Just think of that, Mr. President. They investigated members of Congress who were asking them about things they'd done wrong. And then the troubling pattern of intimidation that included the CIA referring its own congressional overseers to the Justice Department for criminal prosecutions. My God, we're going back to the Joseph McCarthy days and things like this. This report, this action, show a CIA out of control, and it's incumbent upon all of us, Republicans and Democrats alike in the Congress, to hold the agency accountable. The Judiciary Committee should take a hard look at the role of the Department of Justice and its legal justifications for this program. Much ink has been spilled criticizing the OLC opinions written during the Bush administration by John Yoo, Jay Bybee, and Stephen Bradbury. The OLC has always had a good reputation, but these opinions sullied the reputation of that office, and they've been rightly repudiated. But the report also demonstrates that even those opinions were the result of key misrepresentation by the CIA about the seniority of the people subjected to these techniques, the implementation of techniques, the intelligence resulting from them. Now, as an institution, if we truly represent 325 million Americans, don't we have a responsibility to examine the systemic failure that allowed this to happen, and then to ensure it doesn't happen again? And those who attack the credibility of this report are wrong. This report is not based on conjecture or theory or insinuation. Anyone who reads it can see that this careful, thorough report was meticulously researched and written. Mr. President, it's based on more than 6 million pages of CIA cables, emails, and other documents containing descriptions the CIA employees and contractors themselves recorded. I believe that Senator Feinstein and the other members of the Intelligence Committee who worked on this deserve our respect and our appreciation. Intelligence Committee staffers, too, have dedicated years of their lives to this report, and they've demonstrated courage and dedication in the face of enormous challenges because they thought first and foremost about the United States of America. I think about the past year, they even threatened with criminal prosecution. For why? For doing the job that they're supposed to do for the United States of America. But they would not allow themselves to be intimidated. And they served their country well. And they have my deepest appreciation for bringing us this truly historic study. And their families. Many times they couldn't tell their families the things they were reading. The families knew some of the attacks on them. These families, too, deserve our thanks. But I'm disappointed those same honorable staffers had to spend so many months arguing in this White House about redaction to this report. We have a White House that's supposed to be dedicated to transparency. The report should have been issued months ago. It still contains more redactions than it should. And I can think of some, I wonder why they're there. But I'm gratified that we can finally shine light on this dark chapter. Because among the many lessons we could take from this report is that Americans deserve more government transparency. That's essential to a strong democracy. Just yesterday, the Senate unanimously passed a bipartisan bill, the Leahy-Cornyn bill. It significantly improves the Freedom of Information Act. And I think today's release of this report is another important victory for greater government transparency. So I strongly disagree with those who argue this report should not come out, and those who have tried to pressure and silence Senator Feinstein. Don't place the blame on those who are telling the truth. Place the blame squarely where it belongs, on those who authorized and carried out a systematic program of torture and secret detention, which is in violation of domestic law, it's in violation of international law, but it's in violation of the fundamental principles of morality on which our great nation was founded. In trying times like those faced after September 11th, and those we face now, we look to our intelligence, our military, and law enforcement professionals to keep us safe, and we're fortunate to have so many talented people in intelligence, military, and law enforcement. But one thing, for their sake and our country's sake, we should never become so blinded by fear that we're willing to sacrifice our own principles, laws, and humanity. We're the greatest, most powerful nation on earth. Don't say we're going to turn our back on our laws, our history, our Constitution, because we're afraid. Well, this senator is not afraid. Because no matter what, our enemies are human beings. And no matter how hardened and evil they are, no matter how repulsive their actions, and many are, no matter how horribly they treat their own victims, we do not torture them because we don't join them on that dark side of history. We stand on the other side of history as Americans. Generations of men and women have given their lives. Many have even endured torture themselves in order to protect this nation. They did so not to protect our way of life, but to protect our principles, our understanding of right and wrong, of humanity, of evil. The shameful actions uncovered by this report dishonored those men and women who have fought to protect what is best of our nation, as well as the men and women even today who continue to put their lives at risk for this country. Americans know throughout this country we're better than this. As we heard after Abu Ghraib, and we'll hear now, we're better than this. And we should never let this happen again. But let's show the rest of the world that too. Mr. President, I've spoken much longer than I normally do, but this is important to me. I yield the floor.